The emergency call came in at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. Jeffrey Martinez had been working Chicago EMS for 8 years, long enough to know that the most life-changing moments often began with the most ordinary circumstances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He was restocking his ambulance outside Northwestern Memorial when the radio crackled to life. Lost child in Millennium Park, male, approximately 7 years old, last seen near the Crown Fountain. What the dispatcher didn't mention, what Jeffrey couldn't have known as he drove through the afternoon traffic with sirens wailing, was that this wouldn't be just another routine call. This would be the day everything changed. Jeffrey pulled up to Millennium Park just as the autumn sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the sprawling green space. Chicago in October was unpredictable, and today carried that crisp edge that promised winter wasn't far behind. He grabbed his medical kit out of habit, though this seemed like a straightforward situation. Lost kids were usually more scared than hurt, and most reunions happened within the first hour. He'd done this dance dozens of times before. The scene near Crown Fountain was controlled chaos. Park security had established a small perimeter while concerned families and tourists gathered at a respectful distance, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the drama unfolding. Jeffrey spotted the child immediately. The boy was sitting on the ground near the fountain's edge, knees pulled to his chest, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. His expensive sneakers and designer jacket stood out against the park's casual afternoon crowd. This wasn't a kid from the neighborhood. Jeffrey approached slowly, the way he'd learned to move around frightened children. Fast movements and loud voices only made things worse, especially when a kid was already overwhelmed. He crouched down about 6 feet away, close enough to be heard but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. The boy looked up with tear-streaked cheeks and the kind of wide, scared eyes that reminded Jeffrey painfully of his own daughter Mia during her worst moments. "Hey there, buddy," Jeffrey said softly, setting his medical kit aside where the boy could see it wasn't a threat. "I'm Jeffrey. I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" The child wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, studying Jeffrey's uniform with the careful attention that only scared kids possessed. "Tyler," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the fountain's gentle splashing. "Tyler Morrison. I can't find my mom." Jeffrey felt something twist in his chest at the raw vulnerability in the boy's voice. Tyler couldn't have been older than 7, maybe 8, and he had that particular kind of composure that came from being raised to be polite even when the world was falling apart around him. This was a kid who'd been taught to use his full name when talking to strangers, who probably knew his address and phone number by heart, who'd been prepared for this exact situation by a parent who worried about all the ways the world could hurt a child. "Tyler Morrison," Jeffrey repeated, giving the name the weight it deserved. "That's a strong name, and I bet your mom is looking everywhere for you right now." He pulled out his radio, calling in the boy's name and description to dispatch, knowing they'd already be coordinating with Chicago police to track down the family. "How about we get you somewhere warm while we figure this out? I've got some hot chocolate in my ambulance, and it's got the good kind of heater that doesn't make any scary noises." Tyler considered this offer with the seriousness of someone much older. "Are you a doctor?" he asked, eyeing Jeffrey's paramedic uniform. "Kind of," Jeffrey replied honestly. "I help people when they're hurt or scared. Right now, you seem pretty scared, so that makes you exactly the kind of person I'm supposed to help." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Something in Tyler's expression shifted, a tiny crack in the wall of fear he'd built around himself. "My mom says paramedics are heroes," he said quietly. "She says they save people." Jeffrey smiled, thinking about all the ways that simple statement would prove prophetic. "Your mom sounds pretty smart. Want to meet my partner and see the inside of a real ambulance while we wait for her?" Tyler climbed into the back of the ambulance with the careful movements of a child who'd been taught to respect other people's property. Jeffrey watched him take in the organized chaos of medical equipment, monitors, and supplies with wide eyes that held curiosity rather than fear now. His partner, Marcus, had returned from checking with park security and raised an eyebrow at the sight of their young passenger sitting on the stretcher, small hands wrapped around a steaming cup of hot chocolate. "Any luck with the family?" Jeffrey asked, though he could read the answer in Marcus's expression. "Nothing yet," Marcus replied, keeping his voice low. "Park security says they've been looking for about an hour. Kid was spotted by the fountain around 2:30, crying and calling for his mom. No missing person report filed yet, which is strange. Usually parents call 911 the minute they realize their kid is gone." Jeffrey glanced back at Tyler, who was studying the cardiac monitor with intense concentration. There was something about this situation that didn't sit right. In his experience, lost kids usually happened in one of two ways. Either they wandered off and parents noticed within minutes, or there was a more complicated situation at play. Tyler was too well dressed, too articulate, and too calm for a child who'd simply gotten separated from a parent at the park. "Tyler," Jeffrey said gently, "can you tell me how you got to the park today? Did you come with your mom?" The boy's face clouded over, and he set down his hot chocolate with careful precision. "Mom was supposed to pick me up from school, but she didn't come. Mrs. Henderson, my teacher, she waited with me until the office said there was an emergency and someone would come get me later. But then this man came instead." Jeffrey felt his stomach tighten. "What man, buddy?" Tyler's voice became even smaller. "He said he worked with my mom, that she sent him to pick me up. He had a car with a driver and everything. But when I asked where we were going, he said we had to make a stop first. He brought me here and told me to wait by the fountain, that my mom would be right back. That was—" Tyler looked around uncertainly. "That was a really long time ago." Marcus stepped closer, his expression shifting from routine concern to something more serious. They both recognized the signs of a potential abduction, even if it didn't fit the typical pattern. "Tyler, do you remember what this man looked like? Or what kind of car he was driving?" Jeffrey asked, already reaching for his radio to contact dispatch with updated information. "He was wearing a suit," Tyler said slowly. "A dark suit, like the ones the men wear when they come to see my mom at work. And he had a phone that kept ringing, and he kept saying bad words when he answered it. The car was black and really big, and the driver didn't talk to me at all." Tyler paused, then added with the devastating honesty of childhood, "I don't think my mom sent him. I think he was lying." Jeffrey felt a surge of protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. He'd been a paramedic long enough to see all kinds of human cruelty, but something about Tyler's quiet bravery in the face of what was clearly a terrifying situation made his chest tight. "You did exactly the right thing by staying where he left you," Jeffrey told him, "and you're safe now. We're going to find your mom, okay?" "Her name is Emma Morrison," Tyler offered. "She's the boss of a big company downtown. She has meetings all day, but she always comes to pick me up from school. Always. Even when her phone rings 100 times and people want to talk to her about important things, she still comes to get me." There was such faith in Tyler's voice, such absolute certainty that his mother would never willingly abandon him, that Jeffrey felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. Marcus was already on the radio, calling in the new information: potential child endangerment, possible abduction, suspect described as male in dark suit, driving black SUV. Jeffrey watched Tyler's face as the official language crackled through the radio, saw the moment the boy truly understood that something bad had happened to him, that this wasn't just a case of getting lost. "Is my mom in trouble?" Tyler asked quietly. "Is that why she couldn't come get me?" Jeffrey crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. "I don't know what's happening with your mom yet, but I promise you that we're going to figure it out. Right now, my job is to make sure you're safe and take care of you until we can get you back to her." The radio crackled again, and dispatch reported that they'd found a match. Emma Morrison, CEO of Morrison Tech Solutions, had indeed filed a missing person report, but not for her son. She'd reported her son as being taken from his school by an unauthorized person. The case had been elevated to emergency status, and Chicago PD was treating it as a kidnapping in progress. Jeffrey felt pieces of a complicated puzzle starting to click together. "Tyler, does your mom have any problems with people at work? Anyone who might be mad at her?" Tyler considered this with the seriousness he seemed to approach everything. "There was a man who came to our house a few weeks ago. He was yelling at my mom about something called a lawsuit. She told me to go to my room, but I could still hear him saying mean things. He said she was going to be sorry, that she didn't know who she was messing with. Do you remember his name? Jeffrey asked gently. I think it was Mr. Patterson. Or Peterson. Something like that. Mom was really upset after he left. She made a lot of phone calls and used her serious voice, the one she uses when people at work aren't doing their jobs right. Marcus appeared at Jeffrey's shoulder, holding his phone. I've got Chicago PD on the line. They want to know if the kid can give them any more details about the suspect or the vehicle. Jeffrey shook his head slightly, not wanting to put Tyler through an interrogation while he was still processing his own trauma. How about this? Jeffrey said to Tyler. My partner and I are going to take you somewhere safe where there are some really nice police officers who are experts at finding missing moms. They're going to ask you some questions, but only because they want to help. And I'm going to stay with you the whole time if that's okay with you. Tyler nodded solemnly. Will you call my mom and tell her I'm safe? She gets scared when she doesn't know where I am. Sometimes she has bad dreams about losing me, and she checks my room in the middle of the night to make sure I'm still there. The matter-of-fact way Tyler described his mother's anxiety made Jeffrey's heart ache. This was a child who'd learned to be aware of his parents' fears, who carried the weight of being precious and vulnerable in a way that most 7-year-olds never had to think about. As they prepared to transport Tyler to the police station, Jeffrey found himself thinking about his own daughter Mia, safe at her after-school program for another hour. He thought about all the ordinary ways a day could turn dangerous, all the fears that kept single parents awake at night. He thought about a woman named Emma Morrison, somewhere in the city, probably losing her mind with worry about her son. What Jeffrey couldn't have known, as he helped Tyler into the front seat of the ambulance for the ride to the station, was that Emma Morrison was at that very moment sitting in her conference room, surrounded by lawyers and FBI agents, being told that her son's disappearance was connected to a corporate espionage case that had been building for months. He couldn't have known that the man who'd taken Tyler was working for a competitor who wanted to force Emma to abandon a patent lawsuit that could cost them millions. He couldn't have known that this was just the beginning of a story that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. All Jeffrey knew was that he had a scared little boy who needed protection, and that somewhere in Chicago a mother was waiting for news that her child was safe. It seemed like enough to focus on for now. The Chicago Police Department's Family Services Unit occupied the 3rd floor of the downtown precinct, designed specifically for situations involving children. Jeffrey had been there before, usually dropping off kids who'd been injured in domestic situations or accidents, but he'd never stayed for the aftermath. Today felt different. Tyler hadn't let go of his hand since they'd arrived, and something about the boy's quiet trust made Jeffrey reluctant to simply hand him over to the system and walk away. Detective Sarah Chen met them at the elevator, her approach gentle but efficient. She was probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm demeanor that came from years of dealing with traumatized children. Tyler, she said, crouching down to his level, I'm Detective Chen. I work with a special team that helps kids, and right now, I'm working very hard to find your mom. Tyler looked up at Jeffrey uncertainly. Is it okay if I talk to her? Jeffrey squeezed the boy's hand reassuringly. Detective Chen is one of the good guys. She's going to help us figure out where your mom is. What Jeffrey didn't say was that he'd already spoken briefly with Chen in the hallway, learning that Emma Morrison's situation was far more complicated than a simple kidnapping case. They were led to a comfortable room that looked more like a living room than an interrogation space, with soft couches, toys, and artwork on the walls. Tyler settled next to Jeffrey on the couch, still holding onto his hand like a lifeline. Detective Chen pulled out a tablet and began asking gentle questions about the man who'd picked Tyler up from school, the car they'd driven in, and anything else he could remember about the afternoon. Tyler answered with remarkable composure, his responses detailed and thoughtful. He described the man's voice as scratchy, like he had a cold, remembered that he'd worn a gold watch that caught the light, and that he'd smelled like the cologne that made Tyler's nose itch. He recalled that the driver had been listening to sports radio, and that there had been fast food wrappers on the floor of the car. These weren't details a scared child would typically retain, and Jeffrey found himself impressed by Tyler's natural observational skills. Tyler, you're being incredibly helpful, Detective Chen said after about 20 minutes of questions. Now I need to ask you something important. Do you feel safe with Jeffrey? Because while we're working to locate your mom, we need someone to stay with you, and Jeffrey has volunteered. Jeffrey felt a moment of surprise. He hadn't actually volunteered, not explicitly, but he realized that somewhere during the past few hours, he'd made the decision without consciously thinking about it. The idea of Tyler being placed with strangers, even trained foster families while his mother was located, felt wrong in a way Jeffrey couldn't articulate. Tyler's face lit up for the first time since Jeffrey had found him. Really? Jeffrey can stay with me? He turned to look at Jeffrey with an expression of such hope and trust that Jeffrey felt his chest tighten. If that's what you want, buddy. But I should probably tell you that I have a daughter who's about your age. Her name is Mia, and she's going to be very curious about why I'm bringing home a new friend. Does she like video games? Tyler asked seriously. Because I'm really good at Mario Kart, but I don't have anyone to play with at home. Mom tries, but she's not very good at the racing parts. Jeffrey smiled. Mia loves video games, and she's been complaining that I'm too easy to beat. You might be exactly what she needs to up her game. Detective Chen made some notes on her tablet, then looked at Jeffrey with an expression that seemed to be measuring his character. Mr. Martinez, I appreciate your willingness to help, but I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This isn't likely to be resolved quickly. Tyler's mother is dealing with a complex corporate situation that has escalated to federal involvement. We're talking about days, possibly weeks, before this gets sorted out. Jeffrey thought about his own life, carefully structured around his shifts at the hospital and Mia's school schedule. He thought about the extra mouth to feed, the complications of suddenly having 2 children to manage, the questions from neighbors and coworkers. He thought about all the rational reasons to politely decline and let the professionals handle the situation. Then he looked at Tyler, who was watching him with the kind of barely controlled anxiety that Jeffrey recognized from his own childhood, from all the times adults had made decisions about his life while he sat powerless and afraid. I understand, Jeffrey said to Detective Chen, and yes, I'm sure. The paperwork took another hour. Background checks, emergency contact forms, temporary guardianship documentation that would allow Jeffrey to make medical decisions if necessary. Tyler dozed against Jeffrey's shoulder while they waited for the final approvals, exhausted by the emotional toll of the day. Jeffrey found himself studying the boy's face, noting the shadows under his eyes that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd lost sleep, worrying about his mother's work situations. By the time they left the police station, it was nearly 7 in the evening. Jeffrey had called his neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez to pick up Mia from her after-school program and explained that he'd be bringing home a guest for a while. He'd been deliberately vague about the circumstances, not wanting to worry Mia or start neighborhood gossip before he'd figured out how to explain the situation himself. The drive to Jeffrey's apartment building in Pilsen took them through downtown Chicago, past the gleaming towers where Emma Morrison presumably worked. Tyler pressed his face to the window, watching the lights come on in office buildings as darkness settled over the city. My mom is probably still at work, he said quietly. She works really late when there are problems. Sometimes I fall asleep waiting for her to come home and read me a story. Jeffrey felt a pang of recognition. Single parenting meant constantly juggling impossible schedules, always feeling like you were failing someone who depended on you. What kind of stories does she read to you? He asked, partly to distract Tyler from his worries, and partly because he was genuinely curious about this woman whose son had somehow become his temporary responsibility. She makes them up, Tyler said, his voice warming with memory. Stories about a little boy who goes on adventures with his mom, and they solve mysteries together. The boy is really smart and brave, and his mom is the strongest person in the world, and they always figure out how to fix things when bad stuff happens. Tyler paused, then added with devastating honesty, I hope she's making up a story right now about how to fix this. Jeffrey's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, small but comfortable, with walls covered in Mia's artwork and photos from various family adventures. It was the kind of home that prioritized warmth over elegance, function over form. As they climbed the stairs, Jeffrey wondered what Tyler would think of their modest life after growing up in what was, presumably, a much more luxurious environment. Mia opened the door before Jeffrey could get his key out, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Dad! Mrs. Rodriguez said you were bringing home a friend. Is this him? Hi, I'm Mia. Are you staying for dinner? Do you want to see my room? I have a really cool collection of rocks that I found at the beach last summer. Tyler stepped slightly behind Jeffrey, overwhelmed by Mia's enthusiasm but clearly charmed by her friendly energy. "This is Tyler," Jeffrey said, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's going to be staying with us for a little while. Tyler, this is Mia, and as you can probably tell, she's excited to meet you." "Hi," Tyler said shyly. "Jeffrey said you like video games." Mia's eyes widened. "I love video games. Do you want to play Mario Kart? I just got to the Mushroom Cup, and it's really hard, but I think if we played together, we could beat it." Tyler looked up at Jeffrey questioningly, and Jeffrey nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, buddy. I'll get dinner started." As the children disappeared into Mia's room, their voices already blending in animated discussion about racing strategies, Jeffrey found himself standing alone in his kitchen, trying to process the surreal turn his day had taken. 12 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether to let Mia stay up late to finish a school project. Now he was temporarily responsible for a child whose mother was somewhere in the city, presumably fighting battles he couldn't imagine. He pulled out his phone and found Detective Chen's card, wondering if there had been any updates about Emma Morrison's situation. Part of him wanted to stay uninvolved, to simply provide Tyler with a safe place to sleep while the professionals handled the complicated adult problems. But another part of him, the part that remembered what it felt like to be a scared child depending on the kindness of strangers, wanted to know more about the woman who had raised such a remarkable little boy. The sound of laughter from Mia's room, Tyler's voice mixing with his daughter's in genuine joy for the first time since Jeffrey had found him, made the decision for him. Whatever Emma Morrison was facing, whatever corporate battles or legal troubles had put her son in danger, Jeffrey was now part of their story. And something told him that before this was over, all their lives would be changed in ways none of them could predict. 3 days into what was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, Jeffrey's life had developed a new rhythm that felt both chaotic and strangely natural. Tyler had settled into their household with the adaptability that seemed to be his trademark, though Jeffrey noticed the boy checking his phone repeatedly, waiting for news about his mother. The calls from Detective Chen came twice daily, brief updates that revealed frustratingly little progress in locating Emma Morrison or resolving whatever corporate crisis had spiraled into a kidnapping attempt. Jeffrey was finishing his morning shift at Chicago General when his supervisor, Captain Rodriguez, pulled him aside in the ambulance bay. "Martinez, I need to talk to you about this situation with the kid," Rodriguez said, his expression serious. "Internal Affairs got a call yesterday. Someone's asking questions about why you're involved in an ongoing federal investigation." Jeffrey felt his stomach drop. "What kind of questions?" Rodriguez rubbed his forehead, looking tired. "The kind that suggests someone doesn't want you getting too close to this Morrison case. Look, I don't know what kind of corporate politics are involved here, but I'm getting pressure from above to reassign you to different shifts, maybe transfer you to a different district entirely." "They want me away from Tyler," Jeffrey said, understanding immediately. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "That's how I read it. Which tells me that whatever his mother is mixed up in, it's bigger than a simple kidnapping case. Someone with influence is trying to manipulate the situation, and they see your relationship with the kid as a problem." Jeffrey thought about Tyler's trusting smile that morning, the way he'd helped Mia pack her lunch and reminded her to bring her math homework. In just 3 days, the boy had become part of their family in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. The idea of abandoning him now, especially to please some faceless corporate interests, made Jeffrey's jaw clench. "I'm not walking away from him," Jeffrey said firmly. "That kid has been through enough without adults disappearing on him when things get complicated." Rodriguez studied Jeffrey's face for a long moment. "I figured you'd say that, which is why I'm giving you a heads up instead of just following orders. You've got vacation time saved up, right? Maybe it's time to take a few days off, spend some time with your daughter and her new friend." Jeffrey understood the message. Rodriguez was buying him time, but it wouldn't last long. Someone wanted him out of the picture, which meant Tyler's situation was about to get worse before it got better. As he drove home, Jeffrey found himself thinking about Emma Morrison for the first time not as an abstract figure, but as a real person who was probably fighting for her life and her son's future against enemies with resources and influence he couldn't imagine. The apartment felt different when he walked in, filled with the sound of children's laughter and the smell of something burning on the stove. He found Mia and Tyler in the kitchen, looking guilty as they tried to scrape charred remnants of what might have been grilled cheese sandwiches out of a smoking pan. "We wanted to surprise you with lunch," Mia announced, as if the blackened mess in front of them was exactly what they'd intended to create. Tyler looked mortified. "I'm sorry, Jeffrey. I told Mia I knew how to cook, but I guess I don't really know how. My mom usually makes our food, or we order from restaurants." Jeffrey turned off the stove and opened windows to clear the smoke, trying not to smile at their earnest failure. "How about I show you both how to make grilled cheese the right way? Cooking is one of those things that takes practice." As they worked together to salvage lunch, Tyler chatting about the board games Mia had taught him, and Mia explaining her elaborate plans for a fort in the living room, Jeffrey felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders in a new way. The call came that afternoon while the children were absorbed in building their fort. Detective Chen's voice was tense with frustration. "Jeffrey, we've got a problem. The FBI is taking over the case, which means Tyler's temporary placement is being reviewed. They want him moved to a secure facility while they sort out the federal charges against his mother." Jeffrey felt something cold settle in his chest. "What federal charges?" Chen hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Emma Morrison isn't just dealing with corporate espionage. The company that's been targeting her is connected to some very serious financial crimes. Money laundering, fraud, possibly worse. They've been using stolen technology patents to build a front for moving illegal money, and Morrison's lawsuit threatened to expose the whole operation. So they took her son to force her to back down," Jeffrey said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Exactly. But it gets worse. We think they're still planning to use Tyler as leverage. Moving him to a federal facility makes him a more visible target, and frankly, I don't trust that someone in the system isn't feeding information to the wrong people." Jeffrey looked through the kitchen doorway to where Tyler was patiently helping Mia arrange couch cushions into the perfect fort configuration. The boy had no idea that his mother was fighting battles that could land her in federal prison, or that there were people who saw him as nothing more than a useful tool for manipulation. "What if he doesn't go to the facility?" Jeffrey asked quietly. Chen was quiet for a moment. "Officially, I can't recommend that. Unofficially? I think that boy is safer with you than he would be anywhere in the system right now. But Jeffrey, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you need to understand the risks. These people have already shown they're willing to hurt a child to get what they want." Jeffrey thought about his own daughter, innocent and trusting, building forts with a boy whose presence in their home might have already painted a target on their family. He thought about the easy life he'd built for them, quiet and safe and predictable. He thought about the promise he'd made to Tyler's frightened face 3 days ago, that he would keep him safe. "When do they want to move him?" Jeffrey asked. "Tomorrow morning. A federal marshal is supposed to pick him up at 8 a.m. Jeffrey looked at his watch. It was already past 4 in the afternoon. If he was going to act, he had less than 16 hours to figure out how to protect a child from people with federal resources, and no apparent moral boundaries. That evening, after Tyler and Mia had gone to bed, Jeffrey sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, trying to research Emma Morrison and her company. What he found painted a picture of a brilliant woman who'd built a technology empire from nothing, specializing in medical device innovations that had saved thousands of lives. Her company's patent portfolio was worth hundreds of millions, which explained why someone would go to extreme lengths to steal or suppress her work. But the more Jeffrey dug into recent news coverage, the more he realized how carefully the narrative had been manipulated. Stories about Morrison Tech's legal troubles dominated the headlines, painting Emma as a ruthless CEO who'd stepped on the wrong people in her climb to success. There were quotes from unnamed sources describing her as difficult, demanding, possibly unstable. Someone was working very hard to destroy her reputation while she was too busy fighting for her freedom to defend herself. Jeffrey found one photo of Emma Morrison from a charity event 6 months earlier. She was standing with Tyler at what looked like a children's hospital fundraiser, both of them wearing matching grins as Tyler held up a certificate recognizing his mother's donation. In the photo, Emma looked tired but genuinely happy, her arm around her son in a gesture that spoke of real affection rather than photo opportunity posing. This was the woman whose child was sleeping peacefully in Jeffrey's guest room, trusting that the adults in his life would somehow fix the impossible situation that had torn his family apart. Jeffrey closed the laptop and made a decision that would change everything. Tyler Morrison wasn't going to any federal facility in the morning, Whatever it took, Jeffrey was going to find a way to reunite this family before powerful people could use an innocent child as a weapon in their corporate war. The plan that formed in Jeffrey's mind was probably illegal, definitely dangerous, and almost certainly doomed to failure. But as he listened to the quiet sounds of children breathing safely in his home, Jeffrey realized he'd rather fail trying to protect them than succeed at abandoning them to a system that saw Tyler as collateral damage. Tomorrow morning, when the federal marshal arrived to collect Tyler Morrison, they were going to find an empty apartment and a paramedic, who'd finally learned that sometimes keeping people safe meant breaking rules that were designed to protect the wrong people. Jeffrey woke the children at 5 in the morning, whispering urgently that they needed to leave quickly and quietly. Mia, still half asleep, asked no questions beyond whether she should bring her favorite stuffed animal. Tyler, more alert, seemed to understand that something serious was happening, but trusted Jeffrey enough to follow instructions without explanation. Within 20 minutes, they were in Jeffrey's truck, driving through the pre-dawn darkness toward the one place Jeffrey hoped they might find answers. Chicago General Hospital at sunrise was a familiar landscape to Jeffrey, but today he wasn't there as a paramedic. He was there as a desperate man with 2 children who needed protection and a growing certainty that Emma Morrison was somewhere in the city, probably being held against her will while federal agents built cases against her based on manufactured evidence. Dr. Patricia Williams found them in the hospital cafeteria an hour later, drawn by Jeffrey's cryptic text message about needing help with a family emergency. Patricia had been Jeffrey's mentor when he'd first considered medical school years ago, before life circumstances had forced him toward more practical career choices. She was also one of the few people Jeffrey trusted completely, someone who'd spent her career prioritizing patients over politics. "Jeffrey Martinez, what have you gotten yourself into?" Patricia asked as she sat down, across from him, studying Tyler and Mia with the sharp attention of someone trained to notice important details. Jeffrey had rehearsed several versions of this conversation, but faced with Patricia's direct gaze, he found himself telling the complete truth. The kidnapping attempt, Tyler's placement in his care, the federal pressure to move the boy, and his growing suspicion that Emma Morrison was being railroaded by people with resources to manipulate both the legal system and public opinion. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Tyler, who was helping Mia with a coloring book while pretending not to listen to the adult conversation. When Jeffrey finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Show me the news coverage about his mother," she said finally. Jeffrey pulled up the articles on his phone, watching Patricia's expression change as she read. Her medical training had taught her to recognize patterns, and the pattern of Emma Morrison's public destruction was obvious once you knew what to look for. "This is character assassination," Patricia said quietly. "Professional, systematic, and very expensive. Someone is investing serious resources in destroying this woman's credibility." "The question is how to prove it," Jeffrey said. Patricia smiled grimly. "The question is whether we need to prove it, or whether we just need to find her." She pulled out her own phone, scrolling through contacts. "I sit on the board of the Chicago Medical Innovation Foundation. Emma Morrison has been one of our largest contributors for 3 years running. Her donations have funded pediatric research that's revolutionized treatment protocols for childhood cancer." "You know her?" Tyler looked up from his coloring book at the mention of his mother's name. Patricia nodded to him gently. "I know your mom professionally, Tyler. She's helped save a lot of children's lives with her work, and I think I know where she might be." The plan Patricia outlined was both simpler and more dangerous than anything Jeffrey had imagined. Morrison Tech had a private medical facility on the north side of Chicago, primarily used for testing medical devices before FDA approval. It was the kind of place where someone could be held comfortably but securely, away from public attention, while legal and financial pressure was applied to force cooperation. "If I'm right and Emma is being held at her own facility, then we have one advantage," Patricia explained. "I have legitimate medical authority to inspect any healthcare facility in the city if I have reason to believe patient safety is being compromised, and keeping someone against their will definitely qualifies as a safety concern." Jeffrey felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. "You'd risk your career for this?" Patricia looked at Tyler, who was now openly listening to their conversation with the serious attention of a child who understood that his mother's life was being discussed. 20 years ago, I became a doctor because I wanted to help people, Patricia said. Somewhere along the way, I got so caught up in hospital politics and medical bureaucracy that I forgot what that actually meant. Tyler, your mom has helped more children than I ever will. If she's in trouble, then helping her is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. The drive to Morrison Tech's medical facility took them through parts of Chicago Jeffrey rarely saw. Industrial areas where research companies built functional buildings designed for work rather than impression. The Morrison facility was larger than Jeffrey had expected, a modern complex surrounded by carefully maintained landscaping that spoke of significant investment and serious science. Patricia's credentials opened doors that would have stopped Jeffrey cold. Within minutes of their arrival, they were being escorted through gleaming corridors by security personnel who seemed more confused than suspicious about the unexpected inspection. Tyler held Jeffrey's hand tightly as they walked, his eyes scanning every doorway as if he might spot his mother around any corner. They found Emma Morrison in what was technically a patient room, though the locked door and posted guard made clear it was functioning as a prison. She was sitting by the window, still wearing the business suit she'd presumably put on for work several days earlier, but her carefully professional appearance couldn't hide the exhaustion and fear in her eyes. The moment she saw Tyler, everything else disappeared. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, dropping to her knees and pulling her son into a hug that seemed to encompass weeks of terror and relief. Tyler buried his face in her shoulder, his careful composure finally cracking as he began to cry. "I knew you'd find me," Tyler whispered against her neck. "I knew you were making up a story about how to fix everything." Emma looked up at Jeffrey over Tyler's head, her eyes bright with tears, and something that might have been gratitude beyond words. "You must be Jeffrey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tyler told me about you. About how you took care of him. How you kept him safe when I couldn't." Jeffrey felt awkward in the face of her gratitude, uncertain how to respond to thanks for something that had felt like the only possible choice. "Tyler's an amazing kid," Jeffrey said simply. "He was brave when he needed to be, and he never stopped believing you'd come back for him." Emma stood, keeping one arm around Tyler while extending her hand to Jeffrey. "I know what you risked to help us. I know what this could have cost you." Patricia stepped forward, her official demeanor returning as she addressed the security guard who'd been watching their reunion with obvious discomfort. "I'm documenting that this patient is being held against her will in a medical facility without proper legal authorization. Unless you can provide me with a court order or medical commitment papers, I'm requiring her immediate release." The resolution that followed was anticlimactic in the way that most real victories are. Phone calls were made, lawyers appeared. Federal agents arrived, looking frustrated and defeated. The case that had been built against Emma Morrison collapsed once she was free to defend herself, and her evidence of corporate fraud was properly presented. The men who'd orchestrated Tyler's kidnapping were arrested within 48 hours, their elaborate scheme unraveling with the speed that conspiracy often does when exposed to daylight. 3 weeks later, Jeffrey was back to his regular paramedic shifts, but his life had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Tyler and Emma had become regular dinner guests, with Tyler teaching Mia increasingly complex video game strategies, while Emma and Jeffrey discovered they shared a similar sense of humor about the absurdities of single parenting. Emma had insisted on establishing a college fund for Mia that matched the one she'd always maintained for Tyler, but more than that, she'd become the kind of friend Jeffrey hadn't realized he'd been missing. Someone who understood the weight of being solely responsible for another person's happiness and safety. Someone who appreciated the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things for children who depended on them. As Jeffrey tucked Mia into bed one evening, she asked the question he'd been expecting for weeks. "Dad, are you going to marry Emma like in the movies?" Jeffrey smiled, thinking about the woman who was currently in his kitchen, helping Tyler with homework while simultaneously managing a conference call with her patent attorneys. "I don't know, sweetheart," Jeffrey said honestly. "But I know that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, not the ones you're born into. And I think we've chosen each other, all 4 of us, in all the ways that matter." From the kitchen came the sound of laughter, Tyler's voice mixing with Emma's as they celebrated a successful completion of long division problems. It was the sound of a family that had found itself in the most unlikely circumstances, built on trust and kindness and the simple decision to show up for each other when it mattered most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.